I love Otz. Everyone loves Otz. But there's not much the DBD community loves as much as Otz. One of the things the community loves much, much less than Otz is the nurse. The nurse is a very, very powerful killer and the community has always known it. She's had her reputation as DBD's strongest killer forever, and has made her a constant point of discussion and consternation, like a stone in your shoe, or a tax bill, or a nasty rash. In a recent video Otz made, he listed 10 important things behaviour has been doing wrong lately, and one of those things, he claimed, was not nerfing the nurse, because her presence in the game in her current state warps the game's balance and design choices too much.
Mistake number 9, not nerfing the nurse already. The nurse is a bit of a problematic killer. She often shows up at the top of every tier list for being an S tier, very, very strong killer. It is no real secret that this killer is single-handedly bottlenecking a lot of the design choices in Dead by Daylight.
He used the examples of maps and aura perks having to be balanced around nurse, which are not opinions I necessarily disagree with completely, but I think that comes even close to telling the whole story about the damage S tier balancing is doing to the game right now. So I'm about to do 2 things that will likely get me in trouble. Disagree with Otz, and defend the nurse. But perhaps not for the reasons you might think. For the most part, I don't disagree with the video itself. Nurse definitely warps the game's balance around herself to some extent, but I believe Otz's video misses such an important point that it's incorrect simply by omission. It's like that Bible verse. Why worry about the speck nurse through in your brother's eye, but not the Final Destination 2's worth of logging trucks in your own eye? And who could be driving those trucks faster than the coked up orange Scotsman himself, Nurse's roommate in S tier, the Blight? For anybody who's gotten lost in a metaphor, I don't blame you by the way, it was bloody dreadful. I believe Blight is a far more egregious example than Nurse of a killer who was warped Dead by Daylight around himself, both by Otz's criteria that he gave to Nurse, and some other ways that he's changed the game that Nurse could only dream of. Incrementally, bit by bit over the last 5 years, Dead by Daylight has been blighted by this constant S-tier presence who, despite overwhelming success for all this time, has received bug fixes and side grades and tech adjustments and add-on nerfs, but, unlike Nurse, no actual serious reductions to his base kit power, ever. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to how the Blight took over Dead by Daylight. First things first, let's talk about their relative strength, because it's no secret that Nurse and Blight have basically always been the top 2 killers in the game, at least for as long as Blight has existed. There's always been other S tiers just under them at various points, like Spirit, Hillbilly, Dracula, Kaneki, and most recently Krasu, but at the top it's basically always a 2-horse race. Even right now, when Krasu is obviously and rampantly overtuned and will likely get wound back to her PTB state in the next week or 2, it's still not uncommon to think that Nurse and Blight are both better than her. Some people believe that Nurse has always been the better of the 2, but I strongly disagree. I think there's been periods where Nurse is better than Blight, periods where the 2 have been dead equal, and periods, especially recently, where Blight has been better, depending on the balance state of the 2 killers and the wider game around them. Right now, on patch 9.2.0 for example, I think Blight actually beats out Nurse a fair bit in terms of strength, and to explain why, we need to look at what makes these 2 killers so strong. After the nerfs she's gotten, Nurse's strengths at this point are entirely in the chase. She can be absurdly lethal, and take survivors from healthy to downed unbelievably quickly, even against really good players, because a lot of the normal rules of chasing just don't apply to her. Density of chained resources are not a bottleneck for her in the same way they are for everybody else. A tile setup that might take other killers minutes to crack might be even easier for her to play around than a random garbage villa that a regular killer could 50-50 at. Nurse operates on different criteria for success in chase than every other killer in Dead by Daylight, which allows high performance nurses to utterly dominate lobbies with some consistency, but she does have her weaknesses. Her glacially slow base movement speed forces her to use her blinks to cover the map as well as in chase, and since she lost her range add-ons and most of her recharge add-ons as well, her map coverage is really not great anymore. By the raw numbers, she's only slightly faster at getting from A to B than a standard M1 with no power. So on big maps you can start to have difficulties because it doesn't matter how quick the chase is if you can't get across the map quickly enough to stop the gens from popping. The only maps where I would argue Nurse has legitimately good mobility are a multi-floor map, but you can shortcut the need that most killers would have to find a flight of stairs. Blight, on the other hand, has a far more conventional chase dynamic. Pallet setups become problems that he has to break through if he wants to down survivors quickly, and this means his chase time directly correlates with available map resources like every other killer. Early chases are longer because the servers have more resources to burn, which makes Blight's first few hooks come in much slower than Nurse's most of the time. But what Blight has that she doesn't is absolutely absurd map mobility and catch-up potential. Trips that would take an M1 killer, or Nurse, 5 to 10 working days to make, Blight can manage in just a couple of seconds, so he can interrupt a heal, protect a generator, or contest and unhook virtually on demand. This mobility also gives him powerful chasing tools as well. He can bump logic around a tile to force you to drop the pallet early or die as he runs you down. His lethal rushes can break pallets and zone effectively, and if you leave a tile without another one extremely close to you, Blight can pretty much guarantee a hit in transition between tiles. Blight has to break pallets and play around resource clusters like every other killer. He doesn't break the rules in the way that Nurse does, but his strength comes from his sheer efficiency at basically everything because he's more or less playing the game on fast forward. Map traversal and chasing is not done at 115% speed, but at 230% if not higher, and that gives Blight so much more time to do everything than other killers get to enjoy. In effect, if Nurse's power is playing a different game, Blight's power is just being better than you. As such, we find Nurse and Blight scrapping over the top spot based on whether Nurse's strength or Blight's strengths are more useful in the current meta. For example, right now, Blight is probably better than Nurse because of a couple of recent perk changes that allow Blight to get more value out of his map pressure. Ruin just got buffed to 150% regression, which is great news for Blight because he can rush around the map and force survivors off of generators more easily than Nurse can, allowing Ruin to eat that progress. Off the record also just got nerfed, which benefits Blight more than Nurse because the best anti-tunnel perk in the game being gone means there's less protection for survivors when he goes back to hook to tunnel, something that he can do much more easily than Nurse because he's so much faster. There's even some more indirect value he can enjoy as well. OTR getting nerfed heavily means that Blood Rush can become more common as an anti-tunneling choice. There's almost no killers in the game who can catch up to you quickly enough to tunnel you through 2 sprint bursts back to back. Nurse sure as hell can't. But you know who can, right? Shoulder the Burden is also easier for Blight to counter because as a 115 killer he might actually be able to capitalise on the expose, which Nurse should never be able to do. Anti-camp perks like Reassurance are more punishing for Nurse because she has lower mobility and has to commit more to a camp out than Blight does, and Conviction combos can be activated before Nurse comes out of her blink fatigue. When Nurse has just burned her blinks, she is slower than survivors, meaning that if Conviction Soul Guard or Conviction Flip-Flop Power Struggle are in play, it is far easier to counter for the killer who is still a chase threat without their power, because the survivors will time their Conviction use around when the killer's power is not available, and Blight can just handle these situations more comfortably than Nurse can. Right now, the meta favours killers who can cover the map quickly and interrupt or catch up to survivors to tunnel them over raw chase lethality, but that's not always true. For example, during the Turbo Mega Healing meta, where resets were happening so fast that not even Blight could interrupt them, the strongest thing you could do as killer was end chases as quickly as you could, because you had to commit to every chase you took to not lose time efficiency. So Nurse was absolutely exceptional, especially because at the time she could also run Starstruck, meaning she didn't care if you were healthy or not. I know Watts didn't really talk about this so much in his video, but I'm just laying this groundwork now before we continue. In my opinion, Nurse and Blight are, and almost always have been, extremely close in strength. Right now, there's a good chance Blight is even better, which makes what Ott says next a little bit perplexing to me.
She often shows up at the top of every tier list for being an S tier, very, very strong killer. The developers cut her some slack because statistically she often doesn't perform so well. In fact, because she is difficult to play and needs to be played in a very specific way, it's pretty common to see her at the bottom of the kill rate list because she doesn't do super well in the hands of beginners. So on average, she doesn't really kill a lot, and the devs cut her some slack because of that.
So Nurse's lower than average kill rate is why the devs cut her some slack. Okay, so, what's Blight's excuse? Nurse has always been seen to have a lower than average kill rate because she's unintuitive and awkward to get into for the first time, and a lot of knowledge that you learn as a killer has to be thrown away playing Nurse because she kind of plays her own game in a lot of ways. Blight doesn't have these obstacles, so his kill and pick rates have always looked more typical from what you'd imagine an S tier would look like. Whenever Behaviour publishes official kill or pick rate stats, Blight is and always has been either on par with or ahead of Nurse in both aspects, sometimes by a lot. And the unofficial community stats reflect this as well. On Nightlight he has and has pretty much always had a higher than average pick rate, similar to, but always higher than Nurse's, and his kill rate is always higher as well. If Nurse has cut some slack because her kill rate is lower than you'd expect it to be for an S tier, then it would stand to reason that S tiers with high kill rates wouldn't be cut that slack, but clearly they are. In fact, I would argue Blight has always been cut more slack than Nurse, and for a while that made sense back in the day when Nurse was several thousand miles above every other killer, but since then Nurse and Blight have come much closer in power level, Blight arguably surpassing her. This is why Otz's assessment confuses me so much. It's not that Nurse gets cut slack because her kill rate is low, it's that Behaviour cuts their S tiers in general too much slack and doesn't change them as much as they should. And I'd argue Blight benefits this much more than Nurse does these days because they've at least tried some stuff to bounce Nurse's base kit before. If we're talking about a killer that the devs cut some slack to, I wouldn't say that they cut that much slack to the killer who's lost multiple categories of good add-ons, access to an entire archetype of perks, has had a full recode, used to not even have charges on her blinks, at least not compared to the killer who's as strong if not stronger than Nurse a lot of the time, is played more and wins more in public matches, has never received a meaningful base kit nerf in the killer's history, and got to keep Alchemist Ring and Compound 33 for 3.5 years. You want to talk about a killer being cut some slack? Let me show you these two killers for quick side by side. One of these killers has the weakest power in the game, currently bugged beyond functionality, and one of them has arguably the strongest power in the game. Both of these killers have a 10-second cooldown on their powers, and both of them used to have add-ons to reduce that cooldown. But one of those killers got their cooldown add-on buffed in the last couple of years, while the other killer got their cooldown add-on completely removed and turned into the worst add-on in the entire game. I'd like you to take a guess as to which killer got their add-on buffed. Here's a clue: they're orange, Scottish, and the best killer in the game by almost every metric. This is my first issue with Otz singling Nurse out in this way. Her low kill rate is not why she hasn't been changed. It's because Behaviour does not change their S tiers enough in general, and Blight is the best example of that, not Nurse. To Otz's credit though, this isn't really the core thesis of his argument. The video is about how much she's warped the game, not how strong she is, so let's keep watching and see what he has to say about that.
Every time you make a map, you need to make sure that you put enough walls to make sure that survivors can run everywhere. If there is line of sight, a lot of killers get really strong, but Nurse in particular gets completely unstoppable.
Okay, so here's one aspect where I don't think Nurse has warped the game at all. If anything, I think Nurse might have a more healthy relationship with map design than most of the other top tiers, and that's because, to put no finer point on it, Nurse is fucking weird. Otz touches on the ways that maps need to be designed to accommodate Nurse. For Nurse to feel fair on a map, it needs to have plenty of line of sight breakers so she can't just blink on top of you all the time. And Otz frames this in a harmful way. She influences map design because it makes these maps awkward for ranged killers who need clear lines of sight to use their power consistently. I think this is a slightly uncharitable framing for a couple of reasons. The first being that a decent number of sight lines on a map can be a healthy thing to have in a Nurse match because it also allows the survivors to see when she's charging her blinks, where she's facing, and play around it accordingly. Survivors have third-person cameras. At any given time they can see the Nurse better than she can see them, but that doesn't mean anything if there's a giant Badham-sized fence or solid wall in the way. Nurse will just be guessing and safety blinking instead, meaning the chase becomes less interactive because both the serve and the Nurse are not thinking about what the other one is doing. Not to mention, maps would still need to be heavier on clutter and LOS breakers if Nurse was removed, because otherwise ranged killers become completely miserable to go against. So in that respect, Huntress, Deathslinger, Trickster are all as warping to map design as Nurse is. Nurse needs the right balance of line of sight breakers and clear sight lines to feel reasonable on any given map. Too few obstructions and Nurse just downs you for free, but too many and she's going to spend the entire match safety blinking while the serve runs blindly in a straight line with no visual clues as to what the Nurse is doing. If she's warping map design, she is warping it to have a reasonable mix of LOS breakers and sight lines, which is a good thing that should be encouraged because it means killers who like sightlines and killers who don't can both stand a decent chance. Otz cites that ranged killers or collision-dependent dash killers get more awkward on maps with heavy line of sight disruption, but stealth killers love maps like that. They hate maps without line of sight breakers because they get pre-run for 45 years. Not to mention killers like Unknown, Wesker, Singularity, and the new girl Cross, who can also like maps with more clutter or LOS breakers to put biopods on, slam people into, ricochet regurgitation or UVX off of, or hide behind so the serve can't remove weakened as easily in chase. And that's another thing that makes Nurse's effects on map design more benign. Because she doesn't care about resource density or distribution, you don't need to super stack a map with pallets to make it feel playable against her. When you're designing a map that, say, both Trapper and Nurse need to play on, you don't need to worry about giving it too many strong pallets for Trapper to deal with, because filling it full of strong pallets isn't going to help against Nurse anyway up to a point. The same is kind of true for map size as well. Nurse doesn't have any better map ability than an M1 killer now that, range add-ons are gone, so she doesn't demand a huge map to play on either. It's very possible to make a map too small for Nurse to feel fair on like Dead Dog, but if a map is reasonably sized for most killers like the Red Forest and Yamaoka maps, it'll be reasonable for her as well. There's no better indication of Nurse's compatibility with existing fair maps than the map she's given in competitive play. According to Balance by Daylight, DBD League puts Nurse on Coal Tower, Wrecker's Yard, and Groaning Storehouse, which are generally considered pretty balanced maps for the most part. Of course, comp is a whole different beast in pub matches, but I think it illustrates my point nicely. Nurse encourages map design towards reasonably sized maps with a good mix of sightlines and clutter, and doesn't demand high density of resources that would make a map unplayable for weaker killers. I don't believe she's warping map design very much because her pick rate is not high enough to demand this, but if she is, she's warping them to be more like Coal Tower or Wrecker's Yard. In which case, yes, please, keep warping the game. Keep giving us more Coal Towers and Wrecker's Yards, please. I don't know anybody who doesn't want more Coal Towers and Wreckers in their life. That sounds like a great time. Let's compare this to the maps that Blight is played on in comp play. Suffocation Pit, Mount Ormond Resort, and Blood Lodge. Suffo Pit, the 3 gen or die map because the middle of the map is the giant link of chain tiles? The map that made Trapper Wraith Suffo a meme because in a 1v1, survivors can comfortably have 5-minute chases on it? Yeah, that's the map Blight gets. Ormond and Blood Lodge aren't as bad, but they're still pretty unpleasant due to their size. If you've never played a stealth M1 like Maya's on Blood Lodge, I envy you enormously. It's painful. In some leagues, and for a while in DBDL, Blight was even put on Gas Heaven, an all-time garbage map for basically any killer because it's huge, stacked to shit, and has a main building designed by Satan. But Gas Heaven, at least until recently, was balanced for Blight, because a giant stacked map is what Blight needs to feel balanced on. Blight is a world-class pallet muncher. He forces pallets down very quickly and basically instantly kills survivors if the nearest one is too far away from you at any given time. This means that for a map to feel balanced for Blight, it has to have a high density of pallets, because each pallet needs to be close enough to the next one to stop Blight from running you down in transition between tiles. So, just turn the entire map into a Suffocation Pit-style pallet chain and make it unplayable for every killer below the middle of A tier. Same thing goes with map size. The only way to limit Blight's map coverage, other than turn over map into a Hawkins-style labyrinth of tight corridors, is to make it so huge that he has to burn many rush tokens to navigate it, which pushes map design in a really unhealthy direction and punishes low ability killers. There's almost no map in Dead by Daylight that is both fair for Blight to play on and not horribly oppressive for almost everybody else. And as we've said before, Blight is a very common and powerful killer even in public matches, so behaviour is encouraged to design maps and the real distributions in those maps with him in mind. Look at maps like Greenville Theatre, Gideon Meat Plant, and the redesigned Midwich for example. These maps are chock full of garbage fillers every 10 feet. Blight makes strong tiles like jungle gyms far too unsafe, so he encourages a quantity of chainable pallets over quality, and a lot of recent maps have been trending in this direction. Hell, we've just had a major update to map RNG that stuffed many maps full of extra fillers, including maps like Gas Heaven, Ironworks, and Suffo Pit that did not need the extra pallets. We can see the extra pressure Blight is putting on map generation in real time, and I'm not the only person to have noticed this. In this video that Scott Jund made a year ago, he bemoaned the fact that modern DBD maps have just been filled up with more and more garbage pallets, like the then freshly released Greenville Theatre map.
Right, so here's like the standard behavior classic design. It's usually like a strong tile with kind of like a bit of a weaker one, and then maybe like a filler tile into another potentially strong or weaker tile. Then you got like, your shack, and then you got some filler tiles just sort of around here with rocks and stuff like that. Another one over there. And it's the balance that I find to be the best overall. So now here is the like new style of behavior palette and map design. It's just unsafe palette, 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 unsafe palette right there. This can be a jungle gym, to be fair. This can actually be like a regular jungle gym, so that one can be fine. So if you're noticing a pattern here, there's just unsafe pallets every 3 feet. Instead of actually having a decent mix of really strong pallets and really weak pallets, they just slap 50 pallets everywhere, but they're all really bad pallets. All right, so obviously the issue here is that the new type of map design, like the Unknowns map and Hawkins, for example, it's basically just 25 unsafe pallets just thrown just randomly in a bunch of rocks and stuff like that. They're typically all pretty unsafe loops with maybe like 1 or 2 like actually decently safe tiles and pallets that you probably have to kick. And then every other pallet, they're just everywhere.
Scott noticed the symptom but failed to diagnose the condition. Maps have become more dense with pallets, in part because Blight's high presence in games and immense pressure he puts on map resources has demanded a high density of pallets if he's going to put balance on those maps. If you're not dropping a pallet quickly against a Blight, he's probably dropping you even quicker, and stacking maps up with enough pallets to let you do this consistently, and give you time for all the gens to get done, is going to be bad news for everybody else. Ironically, except Nurse.
Additionally, it always stifles like half the killer powers in the game. Like whenever I get like Hawkins or something, if I'm not playing like a stealth killer or like, a killer that only really gets M1s or something like that, I'm usually having a bad time. Like trying to get hatchet hits or Bubba chainsaws or anything. It's like if there's a pallet every 5 feet, it's really, really hard to actually successfully do that stuff. So I feel like the abundance of a ton of unsafe pallets, it stifles a bunch of killer powers and sort of forces everyone into M1s.
I think Scott's got the logic backwards here. These maps aren't problematic because they're stifling killer powers like Blight and Billy. The killer powers like Blight and Billy are so problematically strong, so far above the rest of the roster, that maps have to be built in ways that stifle those killers' strengths. Blight makes safe resources too unsafe, between his speed at forcing a pallet drop and his catch-up potential, so the old styles of maps are not fair for the survivors to have to play on against Blight. They need more resources than the old map styles could accommodate reasonably, because as soon as pallets start being further apart than like 1.5 inches, Blight runs the team over like a tank. In my opinion, Nurse is not warping map design in a harmful way. She's not played enough at a high enough level to do that, and even if she is, the effects that she has on map design are net neutral or perhaps even beneficial to the game's health. It's one way in which her playing her own game is actually an asset. A map can be balanced around Nurse and balanced around Trapper or Doctor at the same time. The same cannot be said for Blight. He demands a map be stacked up with so much safety, so much garbage you can feed him, that it is unreasonable to play a lot of other killers on those maps, and you have to fill the map to the brim with easy trainable resources and a decent size to have him not be painfully overwhelming to go against. And as you can tell from his kill rates, that isn't even a reliable solution. But the main crux of Otz's argument is not maps, it is about perks. And here, to his credit, he does have a stronger argument that Nurse is warping the game.
But the real big problem, in my opinion, are aura perks. Luckily, the Nurse used to be able to insta-down survivors, but cannot do it anymore. The Nurse used to be able to apply basic attack perks, such as Know It, and every insta-down perk was incredibly strong on Nurse, and the developers rightfully removed her ability to use basic attacks. Now, when you attack with your teleport, it's a special attack, doesn't insta-down. That's good. But we're still left with the whole auto-reading problem. Auto-reading on Nurse pretty much removes the one counterplay that you have on her other than just hold forward and hope she doesn't catch up. You have to get behind stuff. You have to get behind line of sight, behind obstacles, behind walls, and good auto perks completely make this impossible against a even mediocre Nurse. This means that every auto perk in the game has to be balanced around Nurse, and so far we're not doing great. A perk such as Awakened Awareness, which is right now pretty mediocre, got nerfed in the PTB because this perk was actually a little bit too good on the nurse. You could hook a survivor, and because it lingered a little bit with Lethal Pursuer, then that's, by the way, going back to the previous problem that we talked about, perks with ripple effects, you could actually hook a survivor and then go immediately for someone in the vicinity, and it was really, really oppressive. So even though this was not really super OP on any other killer, on nurse, it was a problem, and thus the perk had to be nerfed. And now Awakened Awareness is a perk that, let's be honest, you're never going to see anyone run.
Look, I've been glazing Nurse a lot today, but it's hard to argue with Otz here. Nurse has been holding back the power level of close range aura reading perks for quite some time now, and until fairly recently, she was doing the same thing to expose perks. Awakened Awareness got nerfed for her, and there's every possibility that other perks like Predator, Nowhere to Hide, I'm All Ears, Floods of Rage, the brand new Wandering Eye, or the reworked Deerstalker might suffer the same fate. In that respect, Nurse is definitely warping the game with the way she abuses information perks. But you're not going to believe who else is doing that with completely different sets of perks. Nurse breaks close range aura reading because it lowers the threshold for her to make mistakes in chase. In a lot of situations where she can't clearly see what's going on, Nurse has to make educated guesses as to where you're going so she can blink correctly. You can predict where she thinks you're going to go and play around it. That is the core of Nurse's chases, and close range aura reading just tells her so she doesn't have to guess. That mind gaming and educated guesswork is gone now if she can just know where you are and blink directly on top of you. Blight uses long range aura reading and information perks in a very similar way, except to inform his macro play rather than his chase decisions. Just like Nurse uses close range aura reading to eliminate the possibility of chase mistakes, Blight uses long range information to eliminate the possibility of macro mistakes. He can be anywhere on the map at any time, with nothing the servers can do to prevent him from being there. The only margin for error is his own knowledge of the game state, and if a perk gave him that knowledge for free, Blight can play a lot of the game with his brain turned off. Of course, on some level this is true for all killers. Close range aura reading is designed to remove the element of mind gaming, and long range tracking perks are designed to supplement or aid your macro knowledge and inform your decisions on a large scale. But most killers still have to invest time into those decisions and have consequences if they make the wrong call. Blight doesn't break the rules in the same way that Nurse does, but he is just more efficient than every other killer at this side of the game. He has less consequences for his mistakes because he never has to commit time to basically anything, and this comes with no additional requirement of skill, no cost to the killer, and no counterplay for the survivors. He's just better and easier for free, and this has already warped the balancing of many perks around him. Hey, who remembers when Tinkerer was a real perk? Tinkerer was a mainstay perk for quite some time. It was very useful on a lot of killers, but Blight used it better than the others because he was the only killer with enough uptime on his ability to follow Tinkerer procs around the map regularly. For most killers, when a Tinkerer proc goes off, you have to make the choice. Is it worth dropping the chase that I'm in to go and defend that gen? It'll take some time to get there, possibly across the entire map, so it might not be worth your time to go. Some killers have got mobility tools that make this decision more interesting. Is it worth burning my very long cooldown Freddy teleport or my unknown hallucination to get there? Do I even have these tools available? How close are my nearest xenomorph portals or spring trapdoors to me and to the generator? Blight doesn't have to worry about these decisions. Even if he's just used all 5 rush tokens, he'll be able to get them back and probably make it to the gen before the undetectable even goes away, much less the gen popping. When combined with slowdown perks like Ruin and Pop Goes the Weasel, this turned Blight games into a flowchart. And from Blight's release until Tinkerer's nerf in 6.1.0, this was a huge quantity of your Survivor games. Blight was as popular then as he is now, and Tinkerer was omnipresent on him. And while you saw the perk from time to time on other killers, it was never as bad as it was on Blight because it was far easier to follow your Tink procs around the map, like a dog chasing a balloon with Blight, than it was for killers like Wraith, Freddy, Demogorgon, or Overheat era Hillbilly. They simply weren't strong enough for Tinkerer to be even close to a problem. But Blight was, and the perk was nerfed into borderline uselessness for him. Otz says that nobody runs Awakened Awareness anymore, and that's probably true, but when was the last time you saw anybody running Tinkerer? A more controversial example of a perk that died for Blight's sins is Ultimate Weapon, because this perk was undoubtedly a bit of a menace for a while on a lot of different killers, and Blight was not the only thing that broke it. The perk working so well with Dead Man's Switch was a massive game health problem that caused issues on pretty much every killer. But Dead Man's Switch is a shadow of what it used to be now. Good. So maybe we can have Ultimate Weapon back to being like usable? Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Without Dead Man Switch in the equation, Ultimate Weapon's design was not inherently problematic. Say you're playing Demogorgon, you open a locker and then wander on the map for a little bit. Survivors entering a terror radius will scream, but by the time you waddle your 115 ass over to the scream location, the survivor who was there has already started to run, and you don't know where. The perk got you into your next chase, but it gave the survivor plenty of warning you were coming, and the information was not what I'd call precise. Now do this again with Blight, but this time you're rushing around after opening a locker. Because you're moving so fast, the entire map will become covered in your terror radius very quickly, and when a survivor screams, you can immediately head to the scream location before the survivor has a chance to pre-run you. Ultimate Weapon is exponentially more useful on Blight than it was on the average killer. And when the perk got gutted in 7.7.0, the devs even acknowledged how lopsided the perk's effectiveness was in the hands of mobility killers. It's important to note here that mobility killers is effectively just behaviour dev speak for Blight in this context, because most mobility killers at the time did not have a terror radius or at least an ability power. Dredge, Sadako, Xenomorph, Freddy and Wraith were most reliability killers in that time, and their mobility had anti-synergy with Ultimate Weapon because it removed their terror radius, so most ability killers were not causing problems with Ultimate Weapon. Kaneki didn't exist yet, and Hillbilly had only lost Overheat about 10 minutes ago. So for most of the perk's lifetime, the only mobility killer who was causing problems with Ultimate Weapon during its heyday was Blight. Again, discounting Dead Man Switch. Even if they nerfed the numbers, Ultimate Weapon can never return to its prior design of being an info perk that follows a terror radius around the map, because Blight being able to put the entire map in his terror radius in a single use of his power broke that design philosophy, and that sucks. But Ultimate Weapon enabled some really fun builds and synergies that don't exist anymore. Ultimate Weapon provided a payoff for unique builds that projected or moved a fake terror radius, with perks like Dark Devotion or add-ons like Iridescent and Published Manuscript. But with Blight forcing the perk to lose its TR synergy, those builds died completely. Imagine how much more fun some of the new TR build options like Unforeseen, Overture of Doom, Phaz Coin or Iridescent Test Report could be with Ultimate Weapon synergizing with them. But Blight meant that those builds would never see the light of day. And with his terror radius going up to 40 meters recently, it's almost certainly never coming back. Every single perk that benefits from map mobility has to be checked against Blight. Tinkerer and Ultimate Weapon are two examples of perks directly nerfed into obsolescence because of Blight's ability, but just like how Nerfed pushes close-range auras like Nowhere to Hide and I'm All Ears, Blight pushes long-range info like Lethal Pursuer, Barbecue and Chili and Thrilling Tremors. Even some slowdown perks fall victim to this. Ruin and Pop both get exponentially stronger on highly mobile killers, and both have been kind of underwhelming in the meta for a little while, while Pain Res, DMS, Grim Embrace and to lesser extent Pentimento have ruled the roost for years. There are a huge variety of perks kept bad because mobility killers use them too well, and until somewhat recently, Blight was the only mobility killer strong enough to become oppressive with these perks. Nurse wasn't causing issues with Ruin or Pop for the most part. At least when she lost her range add-ons and her actual ability to traverse the map dropped like a stone, you can't blame her for these problems because she doesn't have good mobility. Blight is the killer at fault here, and that's my biggest issue with Otz's video. He and the community at large have fixated so much on Nurse because she's weird and unintuitive, because she's old as fuck, because she's always had that reputation of breaking the rules of the game. But Blight gets away with it because his strengths and effects are harder to notice up front. They're more insidious, they're more pervasive, in my opinion they are more damaging, and worst of all, they're far harder to fix. Nurse is a killer with issues. I firmly agree with Otz on that front. Close range aura reading gives her all the reward of perfect blink without any of the risk and margin for error. And I also agree with the solution that he offers to fix that problem.
But the easier one is just to make Nurse unable to see auras the moment she begins to charge her blink. Aura perks would still be useful for her to close the gap and find people, but much like Spirit, if she starts using her power, she just doesn't see you and she cannot cheese you with aura perks. This is something that they should have generally done yesterday. And honestly, if they want to go even further and nerf the Nurse even more, then I'm completely all for that.
Removing the ability to see auras while charging a blink would be a super clean fix. She can still use auras for game sense like every other killer, which isn't an issue at all on a killer with not a lot of ability, but they stop being used as cheesy chase tools, and these are changes that can happen without altering any existing perks or mechanics that could affect other killers. That's the beauty of Nurse having such a unique power. She does play by her own rules, which means that when you alter those rules, you can drastically change her terms of engagement without affecting anybody else. And without the concern of close-range aura reading, I think Nurse would be very close to, if not completely perfect. If you wanted to change her further, you probably wind up looking at things like her lunge distance, get rid of that add-on that gives her a long lunge, and you could even reduce her base lunge distance out of blink, if you wanted to encourage Nurse to be more precise with her blinks. But broadly, I don't see what more problems she could really cause if you took away the close range aura reading. So with that in mind, what's the right way to fix Blight? When I hear myself compared to killers like Knight or Hag, I feel a tide of vomit burning in the back of my throat, but at least Knight plays the macro game properly. He's not some dopey Scotsman catapulted into the game for the developers to fawn over, because his strength shows us just how weak the other killers really are. So my envy is a calling. It is the sole hope for Dead by Daylight, because it is what has driven me to annihilating you. 110! 110! 110! 110! 110! 110! Ah, if only it was that simple. Blight's issues are far more inherent to the way his power works, because he does obey the rules of the game. He just plays it better for less effort than everybody else, and the ways that his power gives him shortcuts, additional time, and free hits are baked into its core functionality. For example, you might want to reduce his map coverage by turning down his movement speed in his rushes, but you can't do that too much without completely crippling his chase power, because the slower he moves, the more reliable it becomes for survivors to camp pallets against him and stun him in the middle of a rush, like a Leatherface. And you'd need to tank his speed significantly to make a meaningful difference to his map pressure. You could increase his recharge rate on his token so that he has a longer downtime between uses of his power, but if you do that, it encourages him to only use it in the safest situations possible, when he's guaranteed to get value, like catching up in a dead zone or following aura perks around instead of using them in chase creatively. In effect, making these issues worse out of necessity, and again you'd need to raise the recharge by a lot if you wanted to make a meaningful difference. You could try reducing his rush distance to make him use more rush tokens to cover the same distance, but a bunch of tiles become unplayable now, because he doesn't have the ability to circumnavigate them in his power. Even making him 110 wouldn't fix any of his problems. It definitely feels right on an instinctual basis that the killer should be 110, but it wouldn't make any of the problems I've talked about in this video go away. It would make him feel worse to play for no tangible benefit. I've spoken before about how Legion's power is functionally impossible to buff without reworking them entirely or making them completely broken, because what they do is just not worth doing, and Blight is pretty much the polar opposite of that. Blight will always be an exceptionally strong killer, one who is easy to pick up and who gets results that other killers have to shit bricks to get, because his kit is just inherently better than so many other killers, and to try to change that would require reworking him to give him more weaknesses or points of interaction at a base level, or totally executing him by hitting his numbers too hard, and I think Behaviour does know this. That's why Blight has almost never seen his base kit directly adjusted. He's gotten collision updates and techs removed and added, and bug fixes along with several add-on passes, but the meat and potatoes has never changed, which should strike you as odd because every other S tier has had at least one major base kit overhaul. Spirit has had her numbers chopped and changed a lot, she's got sound and visual cues added to her phase and lost collision in phase as well, Billy has had 2 reworks now, and even Kaneki has already had his auto-aim adjusted and his token regeneration paused on a pallet break. Most pertinent here, of course, is the Nurse. Her entire blink charge system has been changed, she's lost basic attack privileges and entire blinks, and her add-ons have also been changed on top to bring her closer in line with the rest of the game. Maps get smaller and easier to traverse, so Nurse loses her range add-ons and her extra blinks so that her map traversal gets worse alongside this. Aura reading and exposed perks get better, so she loses basic attacks on blinks, and may well soon lose aura reading altogether. Nurse has been constantly tuned to keep her from getting too powerful as the game has evolved over the years, and this process is likely to continue. In my opinion, it's almost done. But despite being at least as powerful, easier, more effective, and more prevalent, Blight has not been changed like this, because deep down, he just can't change. He's the man who can't be nerfed. So what do? I believe going forward, Blight should be considered a second-tier priority for a top-down rework in the future. Obviously there are killers who are actively on the operating table right now who need to be done first, like Trickster and Merchant. Might need another one too, because Jesus Christ did they fuck him over sideways this patch. But it should be clear by now that Blight's current power, as it works at the moment, is basically impossible to tune down fairly. He prevents too many strong perks from being allowed to exist, he forces maps to become super stacked with resources to handle him, and he does so while being very easy and forgiving to play for how strong he is. If behaviour are not able to tune down his existing power safely, it needs to be given more conditions or prerequisites that become tunable values that can be used to adjust his balance. The dev who designed Blight's power, McLean, no longer works at behaviour, but he said once that Blight's power was nearly very different. They had a super complicated system of serum levels and injections baked into his kit, but the system was shelved because they didn't have time to implement it fully before Blight's completion deadline. I would like to see this kind of system explored again for a potential Blight rework. I have no doubt such a thing would take time, especially if they've lost the napkin Blight's original power was scribbled on back in 2020, but I think it's an inevitable solution to the problem that Blight is posing, and will only continue to pose as the years continue. This might sound drastic, but I failed to see a reasonable alternative. Blight has been a menace on this game for half a decade, and his reign of terror looks unlikely to end any other way. Someday, something will give, and it'll either be a rework that tries to give his kit the tunable values that it needs to have, or, he's getting the merchant treatment. Let me tell you from experience, that ain't fun at all. It could happen though, it's happened to Hillbilly before. One day behaviour decides their top tier needs a little bit of rebalancing, and they swing that nerf hammer way too hard. But do you want to know the worst bit? They could nerf Blight tomorrow. They could hammer him into ash from orbit, functionally delete him from the game in a way that makes the Skull Merchant treatment look like the massage and spa day she thoroughly deserves. But not even that would fully undo the damage Blight has done to Dead by Daylight, because he was allowed to do something that Nurse has never gotten away with. Blight got to reproduce. Behaviour has been scared of making a second Nurse ever since they made the first one. Spirit's original design was meant to involve her phasing through walls before Behaviour killed that idea in the cradle. The Smasher was an old killer concept built around destroying map terrain that Behaviour scrapped because balancing a killer around ignoring the map's rules like Nurse does seemed like a complete nightmare. And whenever killers have been given teleport since Nurse, they've always been given prohibitive conditions, telegraphing and cooldowns attached, so they can never make the Nurse mistake again. It is perhaps ironic that the eugenicist character has been barred from reproducing for the quality of the game to keep her undesirable traits from causing any more damage. I hope I've managed to convince you so far that Blight has been at least as disruptive, if not more disruptive to the game in recent years as Nurse has been. So you'd reasonably think that they should be at least as scared of making a second Blight as they were of making a second Nurse. But that clearly hasn't happened. Kaneki is the most obvious spawn of Blight in recent years. He has had almost every issue Blight has had, with his egregious map mobility and propensity for free hits in transition between tiles, but Behaviour has taken some efforts to prevent Kaneki from reaching Blight's worst excesses. His mobility is tied on some level to his enraged meter, so while he's faster than Blight, he cannot cover as much distance until he bites someone, and he can't immediately start leaping again after breaking a pallet, which honestly is a feature they should have added to Blight years ago. Nevertheless, Kaneki still has most of Blight's issues, along with plenty of his own, and when he's enraged he's arguably even more egregious. So even if Blight was removed from the game tomorrow, Kaneki would keep doing almost everything Blight was already doing, because he inherited many of Blight's design flaws. Billy is a more interesting case study because on one hand, Billy is a far older killer than Blight. He's one of the original three after all. But let's not forget that at the same time that Blight came out, Hillbilly got the overheat mechanic that was specifically designed to stop him from doing the thing that Blight does, constantly spamming your power for free map coverage with very little downtime without any way of limiting how much value you can get from it. Let me ask you this question. If Behaviour had learned their lesson from Blight, had learned that giving killers creative mode mobility caused a lot of problems, do you think the Billy rework would have given that back to him? Do you think they would have given him not just infinite chainsaw again, but an active reward for spamming the shit out of your power for no good reason? I very much doubt it. Blight's issues aren't just Blight's issues anymore. They are issues that are gradually seeping into new killer designs and reworks to old ones, and if behaviour doesn't catch up fast, get on top of it now, and realise they could never make another Blight again, we're going to have a whole ocean of problems later down the line. Blight has to be one of DBD's most influential killer designs, and while I don't think that he's the single most influential killer ever, he's definitely in the conversation, but maybe that's a topic for another day. He has warped the game around himself like a black hole warping space and time, with perks and maps and entire killers redesigned around him, and it's all happening so slowly that nobody seems to have noticed. We talk all the time about lowering the gap between the lower and the high tier killers, but Blight's inability to be properly balanced has been one of, if not the single biggest obstacle to achieving that goal. And I'm tired of Nurse getting so much slander when she's ultimately proven a lot more flexible when behaviour has actually tried to balance her. Otz, if you're still watching this, I congratulate you thoroughly on your endurance. And I hope I've made my case. I just want to reiterate here, I don't disagree with the thesis of Otz's video as a whole. I don't even entirely disagree with the section on the nurse. But I felt a bit perplexed when watching it, because Blight didn't even get a mention, when he's at least as much, if not much more damaging, and much more of an obstacle to getting the game truly balanced. I have no idea if Blight's getting changed in the future, but I can think of no more glaring a symbol of the wide disparity in strength between the best killers and the rest. And if behaviour means to truly close that gap down, increase killer diversity and make sure everyone's having a bit more fun, he will be a problem that demands solving. Only time will tell how they plan on doing it. Look on the bright side, I got through this entire video without once using the term dash.